Sana, presently studying in Sri Venkateswara College of Engineering, Department of Information Science and Engineering. And today in this video, I'll be discussing about on the topic of chi-square distribution. And let's begin the topic. And introduction to chi-square distribution. The chi-square distribution is a probability distribution that is used to analyze categorical data. It is a continuous probability distribution with a single parameter called degrees of freedom. The distribution is a positively skewed and its shape depends on the degree of freedom. This is about the introduction to chi-square distribution and the properties of chi-square distribution. The mean of a chi-square distribution is equal to its degree of freedom. The variance of a chi-square distribution is equal to twice its degree of freedom. As the degree of freedom increases, the chi-square distribution approaches a normal distribution. This is about the properties of chi-square distribution. And next, applications of chi-square distributions. The chi-square distributions is commonly used in hypothesis testing, especially in the field of statistics. It is used to test the independence between two categorical variables in a continuous table. Chi-square goodness of fit test is used to determine if a sample data fits a specific theoretical distribution. This is about the applications of chi-square distribution. And next, chi-square test of independence. And you can see the example of chi-square test of independence when it is observed or expected. Next, the chi-square test of independence is used to determine if there is a significant relationship between two categorical variables. It compares the observed frequency in a continuous table with the expected frequency under the assumption of independence. The test calculates the chi-square statistic and compares it with critical value from the chi-square distribution. This is about how we test for independence of chi-square distribution. And next, degree of freedom. In the chi-square distribution, degree of freedom represents the number of categories or variables that are free to vary. For a chi-square test for independence, the degree of freedom is calculated as number of rows multiplied by number of columns. The degree of freedom determines the shape and characteristics of the chi-square distribution. The chi-square distribution has the following properties, and you can see the mean of the distribution is equal to the number of degree of freedom, that is mu equals to v. The variance is equal to 2 times the number of degrees of freedom, that is 2 into v. This is about the degree of freedom. And chi-square goodness of fit test, that is the chi-square goodness of fit test, is used to determine if a sample data fits a specific theoretical distribution. It compares the observed frequencies in different categories with the expected frequencies based on the theoretical distribution. The test calculates the chi-square statistic and compares it with the critical value from the chi-square distribution. This is about the chi-square goodness of fit test, and you can see the example of chi-square goodness of fit test. And chi-square test statistic. The chi-square test statistic is calculated by summing the square difference between observed and expected frequencies. It follows a chi-square distribution with the degrees of freedom equal to the number of categories minus 1. The test statistics measures the degree of discrepancy between observed and expected frequencies in the data. This is about the chi-square test statistic. And critical values of chi-square distribution. Critical values of chi-square distribution are used to determine the significance level of a test. The critical value depends on the desired level of significance and the degree of freedom. It is compared with the test statistic to decide whether to reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis. This is about the critical values of chi-square distribution. And next, resource for further learning. That is an introduction to categorical data analyzes John Wiley and Sons. And next, Field A Miles and Field Z at 2012 discovering statistic using R-Sage. Khan academic chi-square distribution retrieved from statistics or chi-square test. This is how the resource for further learning of chi-square distribution. And the limitations of chi-square distribution. The chi-square distribution assumes that the data is categorical and follows certain assumption. It is not suitable for continuous data or when the expected frequencies are too small. The chi-square test can be sensitive to the sample size and may yield significant results even with small practical differences. This is the limitations of chi-square distribution. And advantages of chi-square distribution. The chi-square distribution provides a useful tool for analyzing categorical data. It allows for hypothesis testing and determining the relationship between variables. The distribution is widely used in various fields including social sciences, biology and market research. And you can see next the example of chi-square distribution. Example of chi-square distribution. An example of using the chi-square distribution is testing the hypothesis of whether gender and political affiliation are independent. Then it observes the frequencies are obtained from a survey and the expected frequencies are calculated assuming independence. The chi-square test statistic is calculated and compared with the critical value to determine if there is a significant relationship. This is the example of chi-square test. And next, resource for further learning. That is a that is an introduction to categorical data analyzes John Wiley and Sons and Field A Miles and Field Z at 2012 discovering statistics using R-Sage. Khan academic chi-square distribution retrieved from statistic or chi-square test. And next, summary of chi-square distribution. The chi-square distribution is a probability distribution used for analyzing categorical data. It has a properties such as mean and variance based on the degree of freedom. The distribution is used in various statistical tests including the chi-square test for independence and coordinates of fit test. This is about the conclusion of chi-square distribution and example of chi-square distribution. Thank you everyone for watching my video and please do like.